So we've got Louise, Leslie, Christina, Heather, Hay, and Nura. Yep. And Esboka. Who's that?
Hi, Sue from SAC.
Thank you, Sue. I'm not familiar with everybody's names yet, so thank you for helping me out there.
No problem.
We might just give it another couple of minutes, and then we might sort of see if, you know, it might be a really short meeting. Just sort of wanted to check in and see how everybody was going. And were there some questions being raised? It took me a while to get the frequently asked questions up there. But anyway, they're in all three places now, the Plato Social, the Teams, and on the website.
Excellent.
Louise, did you have anything that you wanted to raise in particular, or are you, any questions? You have to unmute. I'll unmute you. There we go.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good.
I'm used to being the host with my students. I couldn't find it. Yeah, look, I did have a couple of. I haven't had a chance really to look closely at the sample exam, as in, you know, prepare solutions or anything. Scott already, and that was in relation to the bad debts. In that, and he agreed that he wouldn't really have the bad debts shown. I'm talking about question 1. You wouldn't have the bad debts and allowance for doubtful debts in the same trial balance under the new regime of how we record that. The bad debts would have been written off directly against the allowance. So he might address that. But the other one was in relation to the discount revenue being shown, that same question, discount revenue when there's cost of goods sold, that's a little bit confusing as well as to perhaps how you would show that and whether it would be wise to have both in the those in the same question as well.
Who would like to answer that one? Scott, Graham?
I'm just pulling that one up as I go, just so I can make sure I'm looking at the right pages. So
yeah, I could see how it would be sensible to have the discount revenue in there. Sorry, I need to have a drink. If you had to calculate the cost of goods sold,
yep.
It just makes it a little bit more confusing when the cost of goods sold is already given.
So, and again, my view, and I'm still looking sort of for it as I sort of go through just so I can see the right one, but I'll often have cost of goods sold being sort of just the cost of goods sold account, if you like. And so discount revenue would be listed. So same as you might have cost of goods sold, you might have stock loss as a separate line item, and discount revenue if they were sort of preparing that one. So I'm just
a little bit confused because we always would have shown discount revenue as other revenue, but now we're encouraged to put it in with the purchases. So it just makes it a little bit confusing, perhaps.
And sort of potentially anyone to sort of keep in mind, I mean, from my point of view, all it really does, if it's listed separately, we would have had it as other revenue. Now it just goes up sort of just above the gross profit line rather than just sort of below it. So
sure.
That would be.
I mean, I would have done exactly the same. I just think it might add an element of a confusion for people who are likely to get confused.
Yeah. And we do want to try and avoid that as much as possible. I mean, we've had a couple of conversations with a few teachers, a couple of teachers of ours. When we get to marking in it this year, how are things going to look? And my view's always been sort of, I think along the SACE view, the aim is not to disadvantage any students. And so if in the marking of it we are finding little things this year that sort of potentially could have been interpreted different ways, there's probably going to be some scope to deal with that as fairly as equitably as possible. But yeah, for that one, I was just sort of having a look because we didn't have to do anything with it. It was just producing. Just jumping between a couple of them. What did we ask them to produce in the sample exam? Was an income statement, yeah. So I would expect sort of that discount revenue to sit under that cost of goods sold heading before gross profit would be sort of, yeah, where I would expect it to be. Rather than
That's as far as I got. No,
Yeah.
that's as far as I got. I haven't got any further. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I just have to leave you for a minute. I'll be back.
No worries.
Is there anybody else who's joined the meeting who would like to raise a question? Down the bottom there is a reaction, so you could raise your hand or
Clap
something.
if I'm doing a good job. That's one of the options.
There you go.
That's it.
Leslie, you've got a hand up.
Yes, thank you. I guess my question is in the same about what you were just talking about, and I understand on the exam having the discount revenue up in the connected with cost of goods sold, but I guess my question is about assessment that students have already completed in term 1 before I was aware of this change, where they would have put discount revenue in other revenue and they would have put discount allowed in finance expense. And so when they're going through in the moderation process and seeing that students have been that put it there, I guess my question is, will they be disadvantaged?
Can I answer that one first?
Go for it, Louise.
Okay. In moderation, we don't remark. What we're looking is to confirm the teacher's assessment decision. So if overall the student is communicating well, or whichever of the specific features that are being assessed, it should come out exactly the same. I think though there's going to be a very detailed subject assessment report at the end of the year, Scott.
Yeah, I think so. And sort of, well, I mean, ideally sort of from an exam point of view, if you've taught some bits and pieces, if they're minor modifications, I'd hope people would be able to sort of adjust those as they go, but definitely from a moderation point of view, my view's always been the teachers assessing it, sort of, we're looking for students to have an opportunity to have achieved at the different levels. My experience has been there's minimal movement as far as moderation. As far as teachers go, you all do a great job. And primarily over the years, and it's become less and less the case as people have spent more time, the reason for any sort of movement in moderation has tended to be around task design, where students haven't been able to achieve at the upper levels. Sort of that's probably been it, sort of, as far as student work goes and the assessment of it. I recall sort of, I don't recall any that I've actually had to move because I think the teacher's done a particularly sort of poor job sort of assessing work that sort of should have been at that level. I'm not saying it never happens, but doesn't happen very often. So yeah, I wouldn't be overly worried from a moderation point of view, Leslie.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Graham, did you want to add anything else to that?
I would probably say as well that with the exams, it's not a huge weighting as well. If you put it in that wrong place, it's not going to change the student's grade majorly overall. Like it's an A+, it's still going to be an A+. Like it would be maximum be 1 mark, even half a mark out of 120. So that wouldn't change dramatically. Yeah.
If at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And in moderation, we're not remarking the work. So it's about the assessment decisions in relation to the criteria that have been asked for to be evidenced in the student work.
And I guess, and also we could look at, what teachers could look at when they do their big assignment, their 30%, when they have to give accounting advice, they should be given probably a balance sheet, an income statement, those type of things. And that's where they could put it in the correct place. And that's where you could reteach it and tell the kids, this is where it should be. Yes, we may have done differently in term 1, but this is how it needs to be done from this point on. So throughout this whole subject, we're always looking at financial statements in every lesson. And that's the point where you could reteach it.
And I think on that, Graham, I think that's the other point sort of that I always like people to consider sort of as far as moderation goes. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a whole assessment of what students have done. So I've always been sort of a fan of if the students don't do so well early in the year, they shouldn't then sort of be locked into that grade forever. I mean, if you give them multiple opportunities to show their sort of performance, what we really want to see at the end is, are you comfortable that they're at that level by the end of the year? I mean, we wouldn't expect them to be, some students will be, but A+ from day one, week one, sort of, particularly if you're asking some of the sort of more challenging things early on to sort of get them thinking about it, but they should get it by the end. So
it's a learning journey. Anyone else got their hand up?
I can see Heather's got a question in the chat.
Oh, I haven't turned my chat on, sorry.
Right.
Oops. Okay. I'm just going to say there's not a name, it's a number. Can't seem to hear you. Do you want to log out and leave the meeting and come back into the meeting and see if that resolves your audio issue?
It might be that she's got her laptop turned off, because I made that mistake in my class this morning. I had my laptop actually on mute, not the Zoom call.
Okay, I might respond then because she can't hear us.
I would just figure it out.
Yeah, exactly what I did this today.
Hey, very good. Excellent. Glad to hear that's working. Heather, what have you got there?
So
she's typing a message.
Yeah.
She's on mute though.
Okay, so I'll unmute Heather. Yeah, there we go, Heather. Can you hear us now? Oh, can you speak now? Okay, while Heather's typing her question, has somebody else got another question that they would like to ask?
Sorry, I was just listening to Graham before about, did you say in the final task you would get them to prepare financial statements?
No, I would give them the financial statements and give advice on them. And that's to say, when you give them those financial statements, like an income statement, that's where I'd have the things in the correct places there. So
yeah. No, I just came in on the end of it. I wasn't sure what to say there. Yeah.
Okay, so Heather, just wondering about the 10 marks for the comparison of two sources of finance for the new equipment. What would you expect? I would have thought about 6 marks. Scott?
Let me have a look again.
I literally just read the question just to my students just last lesson. Actually.
Oh, okay. So Graham, do you want to start off?
You're fresh, go for it, Graham.
Well, I spoke about the obviously internal finance, external finance. I said about the external being there could be a loan, there could be a lease, and then I went through the advantage of those two types of ones. I talked about short-term loans, long-term loans. So I really broke it up to internal, external, and made sure like 5 marks each. Talked all about the advantage and disadvantage of externals. And then internals, I talked about they took 120,000 out of the business. Why did I take that out? They could use that there. And elaborate on that. And the other part is I looked at getting an extra partner to contribute extra funds into the business as well. So there was actually a lot to talk about in that one.
And I think sort of, and again, it's going to be new, so it'll be interesting sort of when we get to the sort of assessment side of it. But it's different in looking at this one, I think, a little bit to our traditional sort of short answer where you might have a 3-mark question and sort of say you're looking for 3 ideas or 2 ideas well explained or something like that. Because remember, at the end of the day, you're providing advice, and so that sort of provide detailed advice that included. So those were the 3 dot points to get people talking about it, sort of make sure you're talking about them. But as Graham said, you can expand on them a little bit. And I think the other thing to be mindful of from my point of view is the 10 marks and the 5 marks is almost to give students an idea as far as a weighting goes. So we don't want them spending sort of 3/4 of the assignment talking about an analysis of trend and risks, and when that one's worth 5 marks and then only spending 2 lines comparing sources of finance. So So I can see Heather's there about a page of writing for 10 marks. Yeah, I'm a bit out of practice as far as what a page of writing looks like now. It could work. I mean, it depends on the content, I suppose, from my point of view. I don't know what other people think as far as.
Yeah, I'm a little bit with Heather. It's struggling with the marks, because when I give them an extended piece of writing of that sort of nature,
Yeah.
I tend to say I'm going to mark it against the performance standards.
Yeah.
And, you know, are you at the high perception, or, you know, are you in the A band, but the top of the A band, or a low A, B? And I tend to knock marks on something like that.
Yeah.
I mark against performance standards because I find it too hard. Sometimes if I do put a mark, I say the whole thing's out of 15 marks, and I then grade it against a 15-point scale, being 15 is an A plus, 14 is an A, 13 is an A minus, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a bit with you, Scott, and and with Heather, I would find it really difficult to go, gee, 25 marks and then 5 points, as I think Heather alluded to, 5 marks for clear and concise communication. I don't know, I just feel like I'm not sure about the marking, and I haven't really looked at it in detail, but I would struggle a little bit, I think, with 25 marks. And yeah.
I mean, I suppose, and going back to your point, Louise, I think the first point you made is exactly the right one, and will be the way we end up looking at it. It is performance standards. That's what they come down to. I mean, the marks are only ever there in anything we do as probably a little bit of a guide sort of to performance standards. I know in accounting we've always marked in terms of marks, but we've seen, and this is probably where, coming back to that moderation comment before, I've seen students get 100% as far as marks go, but if the test that they were doing in the past was only a balance sheet, they can get 100% and not be at that higher performance standard. So I think for this one, and it's sort of one of those other ones, it's good to get the feedback sort of now. When I look at it, we've given the marks as far as 25 to give an idea of probably of that, the weighting of that section. Yes, there's marks associated with it, but if you wanted to look at it, part D sort of just under sort of 50% sort of should be about the source of finance, sort of about 20% sort of analysis of the impact of the equipment, sort of another 20% sort of also on that analysis of trends, and the last bit is about that clear communication. And we did have some discussion around that last one as far as the 5 marks for it, and whether it should be included as a separate item or not, but it is something we are assessing, that clear communication. It's one of the assessment design criteria. So we wanted to, I suppose, leave it there and sort of a watermark to it, if you like, or highlight it there saying, look, we are looking at that specifically. But probably within each one, it's how they go against the performance standards. So I think we'll end up with probably, I mean, sort of a mark out of 25 overall, rather than it being an absolute breakdown of 10, 5, 5 and 5. If that
I think
makes
that breakdown
sense.
is giving teachers and students a scaffolding for the advice. That's the whole point of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we could have just given 25 marks and then teachers would have been in the dark. What are you expecting? So at least they now can see the breakdown.
So within that, would you, back in the day, when we wrote a report, I always allocated some marks for report structure and, having an introduction and a conclusion. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about in a question like that?
In that final
as well?
In that final 5 marks, yeah, that's part of communication. That's part of how they set it out. So depending on, and remembering that we're going to give students the option about how they sort of present it. So I think sort of, we said advice there, sort of, I can't remember, did we specifically say what format that one needed to be in?
I don't think it is.
I don't think we did. No. So, I mean, it could be a letter, it could be an email, it could be a report. So it's sort of depending on what the students believe is the best form of that advice. And so then depending on what they sort of pick, I mean, that's where the communication's off. They're going to do a report format. They'll need some sort of intro, some sort of conclusion there. If it's an email, then it needs to be laid out in the appropriate way. So it's assessing their communication. So there's definitely some marks allocated to that, which is where that last 5 sits, rather than it being the other perspective on it was really look, they should be communicating properly, so there should just be 25 marks, and that's within what they're doing. And I sort of, my view was, and I think what we settled on was that didn't give that clear indication to students that there are some marks associated with it.
It's interesting, isn't it, trying to work out how to set an exam that really relates to how students respond in terms of the performance standards for the subject, but we allocate a mark system so that we can come up with a mark.
A number.
Yeah, a number. It's a bit like marking maths, isn't it?
It's really not like marking maths though, is it? Because it's kind of right or wrong. And I have this discussion with my students quite often about why they got, 15 out of 20, but that was a certain grade, and someone else got 14 and it was a different grade. And I say it's like the level of your communication. Was it at the higher end, or was it, on the lower end? It's not just about marks. I have to say though, and I haven't tried this, but I reckon if I sat down and answered that Joy's potato farm question, I don't know, I'd struggle to get 25 marks in that time, to be honest, on that basis. I'm not sure. I don't like the marking somehow, but I haven't tried the question.
No. And I suppose then, so I mean, the mark, I think we'll probably end up at, and a bit like you said at the start, Louise, I mean, if you've got a written extended response, it's out of 15. Now, I mean, you can make it out of 100, out of 150, or you can make it out of 30, or you can make it out of 45, just to keep the 15s there. Once you work out where the students sit sort of within there as far as performance standards, that determines the mark, if you like. So when we get to it, it's not going to, I mean, it's not going to be a 1 mark for this particular point. I mean, we'd expect there'd be certain things they talk about, but students might come up with something wonderful and new. I mean, it's a bit like when I mark sort of any extended response things here at uni, I always say to the students, if I actually feel like I've learnt something from reading what you've written, then you get a good mark for it. If I'm dumber for having read it, your mark will sort of reflect that. So, yeah, as I said, I think, Graham, you made the point. The marks are there to give a bit of scaffolding. Probably look at them in that light rather than looking to say, have I done enough to get sort of those marks?
Heather goes on to ask things like, how will the students know under exam conditions the trends and risks related to potato production? But really, when you're asking a question, because it's in the context of a specific industry, we're still wanting those more general trends and risks rather than necessarily knowing a great deal about the specific industry. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, look, I don't know, but I just look at this and I'm filled with horror for weaker students, because I think they might just look at this and not even hardly know where to start. And they would be really struggling, I think, to get a passing mark in a question like that. There's a lot of reading there. There's a lot of information to absorb and talk about in that time.
It'll be interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Graham.
I think with assessment type 2, where we have that 30% assessment assignment, this is where you can model exam questions on that assignment. So give them financial statements for different types of businesses. Students won't need to know specific industries and what's happening in those businesses. All that information should be, and I'm hoping would be provided in the exam. And if it's not, it'll definitely provide it. But yeah, in the AT2, give as much detail or make the kids do some research. Make sure you are trying to extend their literacy in that assessment. Yeah.
I don't mind this question. If I'm thinking about that is in the AT2, as you're calling it, that assessment, I don't mind that, where they've got a bit of time to absorb the information, think about it and respond. But in the context of a 2-hour exam, are we talking 2-hour exam? We are.
Yeah, 2 hours.
And this is, what are we saying? 40 marks, so 40 minutes, and they've already had to they've had to read it, they've had to answer these other sort of written responses, and then they've got to write something here. I worry for the weaker students in particular, for the mid-range and weaker students. I do worry.
It'll be interesting, Louise, when you get to the point where you can have students take on sections or do it as a practice exam. I thought, from what I could see, and I really don't have a deep knowledge base of accounting, but I thought there were a lot of knowledge type questions, so that students who did understand and did have sort of the basic knowledge should be able to get a passing grade. But there are discriminator questions to see.
Sorry, I'm just talking, Louise, about that particular question, not the exam overall. That one question about the potato farm.
Yeah. So over the whole exam, there will be parts where some students who are a bit weaker may not come up to a passing mark on that particular question overall, but there are other sections where a student who is a good straight C student should be able to maintain that C grade. Well, we're in a new environment, so but it would be good to have feedback, because there's stuff that's being written at the moment, and it would be important to know in the changeover of the subject how we need to be thinking about things.
Which is part of the reason we've got these sort of sessions on, because we do want to hear about things as they go, and sort of where we can sort of feed or put back in sort of stuff, teacher feedback along the way to make it as reasonable as possible. Again, my other thing, and I think you made the point, Louise, discriminators is the other thing there. I mean, we do need to be able to see the difference between an A+ student, sort of a B, a C along the way, and not everyone sort of has to get full marks for everything. If that's what we were doing, then it's really not sort of doing what it's supposed to do. And again, I think now, I mean, the world's changed a bit. Once upon a time, sort of, it's been a little while now, but where the exam was the moderator of everything else, and that was the sort of be all and end all, that sort of changed things. Now it is, well, it's 30% of the course. It's not supposed to be sort of the only driving force. So if a student has done well throughout, hopefully they're maintaining that, and they're still going to end up with a good grade throughout.
Just getting back to Heather's original question, and I'm not sure if I missed this or not, I'm a bit vague today. Graham, the analysis of the trends and risks related to potato production, what are you looking for there?
I think if you look in the actual exam question, it is talking about in the actual synopsis about water licensing and the communities stuff there. I would probably look at more social and ethical issues, probably. Scott, would you?
Yeah, and I think so. And again, it doesn't have. We're not looking for necessarily specifics around sort of potato farming per se. I mean, if somebody knows something about it, that's great. We'll take that into account. But it is more those general sort of trends and risks. I mean, students should be able to identify. You're talking about a farming sort of production. You're talking about foodstuffs and that. So what are the issues around there? I mean, clearly water's one that stands out because that one gets mentioned. But if we're talking about the popularity of a particular food, whether sort of potatoes are...
How would anyone know that, though? I mean, generally, but the thing that threw me a little bit there, with the word trends, they're going to go looking for some numbers over 3 years because that's what we tell them trends are in accounting. Yep. So what are they going to say? Do we expect them to say, not eating carbohydrates? Or what do you mean by trends? I don't understand. I might be a bit thick today, as I said.
Yeah, you look at quantitative and qualitative data. So that's where you tie that into the course as well. So qualitative data.
And I mean, sort of, it wouldn't surprise me if they're talking about trends as far as potato farming goes. I mean, is it a move towards sort of eating more vegetables? Is it? I mean, they're the sort of things, general commentary that students should be aware of. I mean, the other thing to be mindful of is it's an accounting course, but I mean, accounting is not just about the numbers. So they should be able to bring in some of those real world factors as well. Some of them will have had that experience. Some of them will have heard more about it. They'll know more about it. And if they're able to bring that in, they're probably going to score a little bit better. They're just talking about things generally, sort of qualitative, quantitative ones. They're still going to be able to score, but it doesn't make them an A+ student necessarily, I suppose.
Because in the question it says, someone put in the chat about droughts, because in the question it literally says, in times of low rainfall, there may not have enough water for the river. So it's referring to a drought in the question. And then they have to buy water licensing to actually get more water. So, yeah.
But again, I'll come back to that point, sort of looking at this one and sort of looking at others. While we'd expect them probably to pick up on that, some might not, but if they can find another thing to discuss, I mean, it's not, they have to mention a drought to get an A+. That's not the point of the question. What we try to do is give them some hints, some guidance along the way, but if they come up with a different issue and it's well discussed and it fits in into the advice, then they'll be rewarded for that.
Exactly. I think that fits in with the accounting advice, because that's the whole point of this section, is giving advice to a client. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could get an A+ on that question.
I'm sure you could.
I think I'd need more than 25 minutes or something, though. I might need a week, and a week of class time and homework.
It's only early term 2. You've still got a couple
Okay,
of
point taken.
to build up your skills.
It feels like late term 3, though, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does a little bit.
Get to about Wednesday like today, and you think, surely it's the end of the week by now. It's been sort of everything you do is different, and you sort of, so many things going around in your head.
As another teacher.
Does somebody else have a question that they would like to raise, or how are you going with the assignments so far? Are there any restrictions, barriers that because accounting didn't have any changes made to the subject outline. It was just about using the flexibilities within the subject. So happy to stay on technical and the new outline, or are there any other thoughts that people want to share? Any hands up? No.
I do see Heather's point down there, haven't done any summative tasks as yet. Sort of where are other people up to as far as that goes? Have people jumped in yet? Are they hanging off a little bit? Just be interesting to see where people are up to.
I've done a financial test, did that last term, and I also gave a cash budget an assignment where I gave them a cash budget they had to do January, February, March. I talked about how they had a bumper February because of the fringe. COVID came in, they had to shut down all the cafes, but they could only do delivery services. Gave them trends from Ibis World, and then they had to do a cash budget, a bank rec, do a break-even point on a new coffee machine to help boost sales, and then they had to give it some accounting advice relating to different types of stakeholders and things like that.
You've obviously adjusted your assessment, your curriculum order there, Graham. Because I'm not doing those things, I don't reckon, till term 3.
No, that's the order I do. I do
really?
Financial statements, cash budget. I've just finished debtors. I'll do inventory, balance day adjustments, and then cash flows.
Okay. I was very fortunate that we literally did our summative the day everything went to shit. And we were planned for the Tuesday of that particular week, and I ended up that a number of kids contacted me on the Monday and said, I'm not, my family don't want me coming in. So I hastily arranged 2 versions of the task, one for those who are on campus and one who are off campus. And that was just simple putting into income statement and balance sheet, and then some theory questions around concepts. So that was a really good one to get in the bank. So they've done one, and the one that I'm planning, I rearranged my curriculum to bring in subsidiary ledgers because I thought that was pretty easy. We could do that. Bad and doubtful debts, we've done that. Debtors control, control accounts, all of that. ageing analysis and so on, debtors turnover ratio. So I'm just rearranging
Yeah,
now.
I'm in a
lab.
Zoom with C Sport at the moment.
Sorry?
It's all right. I'll just mute that one. There we go.
So I'm organising, just rearranging a task now, which wasn't in my original lab, but it's going to be, I'm giving them an ageing analysis to start with, a list of transactions, some credit sales, cash sales, sales returns, whatever else you need for the debtors turnover ratio. So they have to enter into the debtors control account, into subsidiary ledgers, get a debtors schedule, do a debtors return, a debtors turnover ratio, and then they have to say ways that the business could improve. They have a written part, ways the business could improve debtors control, talk about the how they could use the ageing analysis to do that, how it might be a good idea to create an allowance for doubtful debts because they did have a bad debt in that period and that sort of thing. So it'll be sort of 1/3 practical and 2/3 a written response, I suppose. And I'm setting it up so that if everything goes to shit and not on campus, they would be able to do it offline. But we now have got our Year 12s back on campus this week. So I'm hoping that they'll be still here in week 5, and that's when we'll do it. So it won't be as a test, it'll be give and have to submit a couple of days later. So they'll have a little bit of time to work on it. So I'll expect a reasonable quality in the written response. So they have a bit of time for it.
Sounds like a pretty good approach.
Yeah. There is in the chat line a question or a discussion from Nathaniel about distance education and students being very distracted by the COVID. So it's anybody else would like to comment on anything that Nathaniel has said there?
Look, I mean, it's going to be a distraction. I mean, it's going to be the tough one. And you know, Nathaniel, there's going to be an element of the distraction. There's going to be an element of the new subject outline to a certain extent. I mean, the one thing sort of, I think that'll probably come through at the end of the year, but I've been in a couple of meetings where people have been giving advice on how we move online and what we do at this time of year. And one of the phrases that keeps coming up is actually be kind to the students, be understanding that they're struggling with everything. I mean, we're struggling with everything. For them, sort of, it's potentially sort of even a bigger deal. So I think you mentioned that you did a reset when you got back. I think that's a sort of a nice option for them. I mean, you're looking at bits and pieces like that. I'm also noticing back in there, sort of Heather saying she won't be up to the first summative for the next couple of weeks, and I think that's probably not a bad idea either. If you're pushing things back, still getting students to do the work, sort of getting them to do formative stuff along the way until things, I don't think they're going to settle down completely, but they might come back to a little bit sort of more normality. As Louise said, Year 12s are back for you guys. I think a lot of schools are getting back to that.
Yeah, because my school, we're not really back to normality yet with the biosecurity zones and things like that, and having students all around the place. So it's just been sort of a bit of a challenging thing working through a new curriculum, trying to work out, because you normally know where students should be by now and you can adapt, but not knowing where they should be at this time to make sure they finish on time.
Yeah.
You do have the flexibility within the SACE, Nathaniel, to in the subject. It may well be that the task that you were going to ask them to do, you really can make it more focused and only assess those things that are important, that you have to make sure that they've covered as part of the subject outline. So everything that we say in the assessment is maximum. So whether you break up tasks and do them in shorter time frames and more focused or more condensed, there's ways that you might try and tackle that, particularly for that cohort of students, because really it's going to take a little bit to get them back on track, I would suspect. Christina asked the question. Oh no, it's from Heather. Will the exam still be on at the same date?
That's all you, Louise.
Given South Australia is in the position that we are super good at this point in time, no exam dates at this point are going to be changed.
And I think if you work towards that sort of, if they change, they'll only be pushed later, won't they? So if you work towards that date,
I seriously, given how we're managing, and South Australia is in such a good place, and hopefully if there's any change to that, it'll be very contained very quickly. We were told 2 days ago that if anyone asks at this point in time, no changes of dates to any of the exams that we can foresee.
I'm just wondering, Louise, how, and it might be too early to say, but given that Victoria schools are, not back and encouraged not to be back and all the rest of it, is there going to be some sort of, flow-on effect there in terms of the ATAR, given that students all get an ATAR, whether they're South Australian or Victorian and all of that? I guess that's something that's still being discussed, but it is an issue, I think, isn't it?
Well, all of the boards of studies, all of the state, SACE boards are working through their own issues, but we don't manage the ATAR. All of the SATACs or ATACs, they manage the ATAR process. So it may be that the ATAR is delayed in terms of when that's published, because you can't put South Australia out and not have it referenced against every other state and territory. So I think we're more concerned with having a quality certificate, and that we're trying to put in place a range of SACE board special provisions for each subject where it's required, so that we can level that playing field and then deal with individual special provisions if that's required. And we have some scope within looking at how we mark exams, given that this is a new subject outline, how we moderate and take into account the technical changes that have been brought in. So there's still a lot of work that can be done to make sure that every student receives a fair result, but also a valid result. So how the SATACs of the world manage the ATAR process across Australia, yes, there are a few jurisdictions who are doing a few little things differently. So I guess it'll be managed, and every student will get an ATAR.
And I'm taking my university hat off completely, just being a dad at the moment, sort of my daughter in year 12 and working through it. I mean, if I'm a parent of a child going to university, universities want students to come next year. That's their business. So they'll work it out. Sort of how it works, that's way above my head, way above my pay grade. But yeah, I think that they will definitely come up with something that is, I think, as fair as possible along the way.
They're working through it, and they're working hard at it.
Can I add about the assessment type 2 from the subject outline, just to let teachers know? I picked this up when I was doing my last assignment, that there's a maximum of 3,600 words for assessment type 1 collectively. That's including all financial statements. So if you are doing a written part, that needs to be counted in the word count.
I did wonder about that, including all financial statements. Like,
it caught me off
what
by
about, like,
surprise.
some are handwritten and some are, like my first one, some are handwritten, some are, typed or whatever. 3,600 for 4? What's 4? Not sure about that.
Yeah, it looks like 900 per each. We have 4 assessments, so some are going to be very short and some are long if you're doing written responses and giving advice in those types. Yeah, I'm just
a bit like Scott. How many words on a page? I don't know. I'm going to have to do a bit of a count.
And
Because I had the same dilemma yesterday, because when I'm doing this next task that I talked about, I thought, what word count do I put on the written bit as a maximum? Because I don't want them to do too much. And I thought, well, you know, if I put 1,000, that limits all the other tasks. If I put 800, is that enough to cover what I want them to do? Like, I don't know.
I didn't even
What
put a
are
word
other
count.
people doing?
I didn't put a
Sorry?
word count in mine because I didn't know. I forgot about it. So yeah, I've got to manage that with my other assessments now.
Hmm.
Yep.
I think.
my
Yeah, sorry, Jody.
So my question is, when I did one summative test. So some students add little information, some students add too much of information. So how I'm going to consider that?
In terms of, you're talking in terms of word count, Jody, or
Yeah, in terms of word count.
I mean, it's one of those ones, sort of, I'll probably get myself into trouble. I'm never a fan of word counts anyway. I mean, my view's always been a little bit, the word count, and the reason my view is SACE puts them in is so we don't over-assess students, so we don't ask them to do too much. I've always, and again, my dad had on, again, seeing sort of my daughter do, she likes to write science things, and part of my job here is word colour at times, and the fact that she'll come and say, Dad, sort of, can you tell me what I don't need to include here? Because she starts off with 3,000 word drafts for a 1,000 word assignment. And so sort of getting to work her through that. So, I mean, it's one of those ones, if the students write more because they can write more, I'm sort of not too worried about it. From a word point of view, I did see Heather's point on there sort of saying, are there any minimums? They've got to do enough to convince you that they've performed at that level. So, and the maximum is just there, I suppose, to stop them going too much over it. I always, from a university point of view, I always say it's a word guide. I mark until I get bored. If you've said 500, if it's 500 words and you've said the same thing 10 times, you're really not sort of selling me on it. If you go a bit over and it's actually all still relevant, then I can live with that a little bit. So I think it's probably, to answer your question, Jody, it's probably more about you setting the test that it can be done in those words. If they happen to write more, I don't think we can overly penalise them for that, can we?
No, it's not part of it.
Can if they start talking rubbish and saying the same thing 5 times.
Absolutely. However, the reason why the SACE board put maximums in there is because there are students who will just keep going and going, and you know, they might be an A+ and they want to tell you everything else as well. There's a student workload across the number of subjects that they do, but there's also a teacher marking workload as well. So the word count or a maximum or a word guide, I like that, Scott, is there to let the students know to be concise and communicate well to answer and get the responses in that they need without, you know, waffle. They need to know what they're doing.
And it's one of those ones as well. I mean, sort of from my point of view, and having had a look at sort of some of the Year 12 assignments and that sort of from other subjects this year, I feel for teachers a lot. Sort of, I know I'm in a slightly different sort of position being here at uni, but sort of with a broad range of students, you need to write a question that encourages students to write enough. So sort of students at sort of the C level, it needs to be open enough so they can put enough content in. But the trouble in having an open question, if you get, as Louise said, an A+ student, they want to get everything in there and they're going to go way over. So I think from my point of view, it's really a case of the word limit is a case of, do you really need to include this? Students should be thinking of try and get it down to that. Some are going to go a little bit over and you're going to have to manage those a bit. But yeah, to answer Jody's question before, I wouldn't be worried if they write too much as long as it's not pages and pages.
Yeah.
I didn't give my students a word limit when I did the assessment. I didn't think about it. When my A+ student, who's an A++++, did write a bit too much, but it was all relevant information and it actually made it much higher order thinking from him. But the test, if you have a test or 2 tests, there's very little word count in that, even with financial statements. So that's going to really pull that back anyway. So it's on balance. I'm just looking at it as a guide as well. Yeah. But yeah, I don't want students writing 10,000 words for every assessment, though. That's not.
Well, that's a good thing about tests. They're limited to how much they can write in that test time.
I agree.
Yep. So then you can get that balance across the assessment type.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe sort of, I mean, Nathaniel sort of asked the question before about sort of where students are up to sort of and where they're supposed to be at now. I think one of the great things, while it's a different subject outline and there's some slight tweaks in what we're doing, the great change is the way we can assess. So you can find different ways. Louise, you made the point. There's a maximum word, but how you get there can be sort of quite different. So this is showing my age now, maybe sort of we should get them all to sort of do their answers in a tweet or something, keep it down. So, I mean, they can all, or an Instagram post or something. There's a limit on what they put in there. So.
Well, I don't know I'm not sure what you're implying there, Scott, that some of us don't use Twitter or what?
No, I'm saying that remember once upon a time when Twitter used to be limited to a certain number of characters?
260.
Well, it is, but now they can blend them into other ones. It's got bigger than it used to be. So.
Okay.
Well, they were reporting news from Africa in bytes of 260 characters, and it was amazing the information they could convey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help, Jodie?
Yes, it does help.
Okay, thanks. All right. Well, we've been going for about 55 minutes. Is there anything more urgent or needing to be discussed? I'd still like to schedule one because it is a new subject outline, maybe week 7 or something like that. How would that, does that kind of, and make it after school so more people can join in?
But after school for me is no good because our school, we go 8 to 5. So
okay.
Like for me, because I'm teaching twilight class, my class is 4 to 7, and on other days I teach at Kaplan. I teach accounting in Kaplan, so my classes are 5:15 to 8:15.
Right. So the recording is a good idea so that you can join in, but you can always, when the invitation goes out, you could always ask a question back, and so then when you did watch it back, you could see what was said. All righty. Everyone good?
Yep.
All righty. Graham, anything else?
No, I'm done.
Okay, Louise?
You're out. Go and enjoy some lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.